Hey guys, welcome to another week of business strategy. This is actually one of my most favorite weeks. We're going to go over a couple of strategies that I think are going to make you a lot of money, are really going to help you advance your business. So first, it is fight night here in Business 555, because what we're going to be talking about today is the competition and how will different elements of the competition fight for your market share. Likewise, how are you going to fight to either gain or protect your market share? So get your gloves on. It's going to be a fun week. Now, when we're talking about the strategy, the overall strategy, we've already talked about our target and how to create value for our target. Then we talked about action tasks as far as SWOT, different goals, and what exact action can we do to fulfill that strategy. After that, we talked about solutions and how can you use tools such as the CTQ or whole product to actually make sure that you're creating solutions that the consumer is willing to pay for. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this second action between the solution and the profit, but I'm really going to focus on this impact of the competition coming in. As you start to develop your strategy and as you start to grow your business, how exactly will your competition react? Likewise, how do you need to react to the competition coming in? All right, so those are some of the things that we're going to go over this week. Now, before I start, what we need to do is we need to define what a business category is. All right, so a business category simply means that different businesses are competing in the same segment for the same market tier with similar products. All right, let me give you a couple of examples of that. So you have Ford, you have Chevy, you have Toyota, and think of the mid-size SUV. All three of these companies develop mid-size SUVs, and let's be honest, very similar product. They're very, very similar in product. Most features you can get with either one of those brands, and they're really going after the same type of target. Now, the targets might differ a little bit, but they're still in the same category. Another example of a business category is JCPenney's, Kohl's, TJ Maxx. And you can see that all three of these companies are competing for middle-class families, more of a discount, high-fashion vendor. All right, so that's a business category. It's really important to get this term down before we move forward. So what happens? And you can see this chart right here. So we call this the trajectory of consumer demand. And what this means is, and I know it sounds like a big fancy term, but it's really quite simplistic. Think of this. Think of the consumer 20 years ago, right? In the early 2000s. And I could even go back to the 1990s if you want. What did the consumer demand of a TV back then? Whether you want to go 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The average consumer, what did they need to see in a TV? Now look at today. What does the consumer need to see in a TV? Vastly different, completely different. You know, I remember growing up and we had one of those gigantic floor model TVs. We thought we were the coolest kids in town because it was a 50-inch floor model, one of those tube TVs that took up half the room. No one would buy that today, right? So now you see TVs getting bigger and also less expensive. Think of the cars today compared to the cars 20 years ago or 30 years ago. They're much more fuel efficient. They have a lot more electronics. They're a lot more connected. They have a lot more standard features. So will you agree that as time passes, the consumer expects more for a solution, right? And that's what this graph is showing you. And here's what happens. Let's say Toyota comes up with a new SUV feature. All of a sudden it gains popularity. So now all of a sudden Ford and Chevy see this, so they want to incorporate that into their SUVs. Now all of a sudden Chevy comes up with a new feature and the demand starts to increase. And all of a sudden, Toyota and the other companies start to incorporate this. And you can see how this builds. One competitor creates an improved product, the other competitors follow. Then another competitor creates an improved product, and then the other competitors follow. And we see this diagram, this linear trajectory of the product improving over time. Now, is it a completely different type of a product? No, it's still an SUV. It's just a much better SUV. We call this sustaining technology. We call this sustaining technology. Now, what you're also going to see in this graph is you're going to notice the three tiers. Remember from week one, you got the high tier, which is the premium. These customers expect a high demand and a high level performance. However, they're willing to pay for it. This is the most profitable group. You also have the mid-tier, the mainstream crowd. These individuals want an average performance. They're going to pay an average price for it. This is by far the largest volume of individuals. And then the final tier is the low tier or the economy tier. This group is the least demanding. They do not expect much, but what they do expect is a cheap price. Okay? So what's going to happen is these three lines are three different categories. So if you think of the upper tier, the premium tier for SUVs, right? You're not talking Ford, you're not talking Chevy, you're not talking Toyota. You're talking BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, Cadillac. Some of these smaller tiers actually own these premium brands? Yes, but it's a premium brand geared towards a higher paying client. It's a completely different category. What can happen is an individual or a brand could start as a low tier, gain market share, gain resources, and try to jump into the mainstream tier. Toyota did this. And Toyota started as a low demand, cheap car that is reliable, will cost you very expensive compared to other brands, and will last a long time. Today, Toyota is no longer that brand. Their pricing is on par, if not even more in some cases, than Chevy and Ford. So there is this dynamic where a brand could actually jump up a tier. There's also a situation where a brand could jump down a tier. For those of you who were born in the 90s, I don't know if you remember this, but there is a sneaker line called Starter. And back in my day when I was in elementary school, that was actually one of the most expensive sneakers that you could get. That was more of a premium brand. Well, where is Starter now? You can find them at Walmart. So they lost their prestige, lost their volume. They're still in business, but they actually decreased now to a value economy low tier brand. Right? So you need to understand this chart. I know there's a lot going on here, but what you need to understand is, number one, we have business categories. Same market tier, same segment, very similar products. Where is your business on this market tier, and what category are you competing in? And who are the different competitors or the different companies competing in that category? And what are you doing to meet the demand of the consumer as they actually start to advance and get more sophisticated in what they want in their solution? All right, so that's this graph. Does that make sense? Now let's move on. You can see it's the same exact graph, but we added something else. Now this right here is the trajectory of technology performance. So the blue line is the trajectory of consumer demand. It is what the consumer wants to see in a solution. The red line is the trajectory of performance, which is what is the technology currently capable for. Now, boom. I know this is confuse you guys. I get that. But take this one step at a time and really pay attention to what's happening here. Is it possible that the consumer could want something, but the technology is not available to produce it? Let me give you an example. For those of you who have to deal with rush hour traffic, I'm sure you absolutely love to be able to just snap your fingers, be able to fly to work, fly over the traffic, and be able to get there in a snap, right? But that technology does not exist. I'm sure many of you would love to have a car that you did not have to pay for gas, or you did not have to charge. I know Elon Musk is trying to make that a reality with solar charging, but it's not here yet. So these are examples of where demand supersedes that of performance. All right? And there's also cases where performance can supersede that of demand. So what does this mean for you as the business? What it means is you need to understand, what is this blue line in this chart? What is this blue line for my target in the category that I'm competing in? What does the consumer expect to have in their solution in order to give me money for it? You need to identify that. And we did that with the CTQ. Now what you're going to do is, now you have identified what the consumer needs to have, you got to make sure that you have the technology and the capabilities to produce it. That's the red line. Now, in a perfect situation, you can see. Okay, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. We're back on. So, in an ideal situation, what you want to have and what you need to have is that red line, the trajectory of product performance, to just be slightly above that of the blue line, demand. Why is that? Remember what demand is. The blue line, the trajectory of consumer demand, it is what does the consumer need to have in order to pay for it. What does the consumer expect to have in order to pay for it? Now think about this. If a product has less than what they are expecting and what they need to have, will they buy it? No. But I also want you to think of this. If a product has more, and I'm talking about significantly more, I'm not talking about to the minimum extent, more than what the consumer is expecting, will they pay for it? And before you think about this, I want you to think of the very first week when we talked about an example of jeans, where one category, one segment of individuals will spend $20 for jeans, while another group would spend $200 for jeans. So the lower category, the one that would be willing to spend $200 for jeans, even though you're giving them brand prestige, even though you're giving them maybe a better quality of a fabric, is that group going to pay $200 for those jeans? No. So this is where we have to be craftful as businesses. We got to make sure that we don't underproduce, but we also got to make sure that we don't overshoot drastically. All right? Because if you have that customer that wants the $20 pair of jeans and you're giving them a $200 pair of jeans, they're not going to buy it. We want to over-exceed slightly. That is the best rule of thumb. Over-succeed lightly and just by a margin. So that way the consumer is getting more than they expected, but it's not so much where they're unwilling to pay for that extra. Does that make sense? And you can see that illustrated perfectly in this line. Now, in some business classes, you guys may have heard of the S-curve, and that's just simply the advances in a solution. So a product, let's say a TV, starts right here. You get an LED 20-inch TV for $500. Then it starts to increase in productivity and capabilities. And now you can get I just bought a 40-inch TV for the bedroom for $200, right? And then you have a new S-curve where a new type of product comes in, right? When I say new type of product, I don't mean a different product. I just mean a more improved solution. Think of the iPhone. When the iPhone 10 first came out, it might have been $1,000 or $800. And then that price started to drop. And then the iPhone 11 came out. Then the iPhone 12 came out, right? That's what I'm talking about, new versions. So as a business, what this means for you is in your category, what is the consumer demanding in order for them to give you their money? How is your competition meeting this demand? And then how are you going to react to what the consumer wants and how the competition is fulfilling that? Does that make sense? So that's the basis of what we're talking about this week. Now, what I want to do is reinforce this concept of the sustaining innovation, right? So products is exactly what we just talked about. Products will improve over time. There will be advances to the product solution, but we're not talking about changing the status quo. We're talking about being better, but not different. Every year an SUV will get better, but it's still an SUV, all right? So that's what we're talking about there. Now, the incumbent, and when I use the term incumbent, what I'm talking about is the current industry leader or industry leaders, right? So if you have, let's say, Ford, Chevy, Toyota. I think Toyota is above Ford and Chevy. But these are all big, gigantic companies, right? So when I'm talking about an incumbent, I'm talking about one of the leading companies in that category, all right? So they have tremendous advantages. Number one, they got very large advertising budgets. They got extensive R&D. They already have a large market share, and they already have brand loyalty. So this is a huge advantage for an incumbent when you're competing in the marketplace. So now let's talk about a new entrant. Let's say either you are the new entrant or you, the incumbent, actually see a new entrant coming into your category. Well, there are a lot of disadvantages for the new entrants, right? So number one, they have no market share. They're a brand new company, or they're getting into a new category. It could be a current company who's just expanding into a new category. They have no market share. They have very limited resources. If you are a new company, you don't have the funds for marketing. You don't have the funds for R&D. You don't have the labor. You might even not even have the human capital, the workers or the intelligence or the IP behind it, right? So the question is, the new entrant, are they a threat to the incumbent? That's a key question. And the answer is, at this point, not yet. They could be, but they're not a significant threat yet. I want you to look at this. So we're going back to Porter's 5 forces. And I want you to see what I'm strategically doing. I purposely, when we talk about a strategy 1 week, I purposely bring it back because all of these interact with each other. So I want you to look at the top level of this Porter 5 forces. You see new entrants. Now, what an incumbent wants is he wants that individual to stay in new entrant status. What they don't want is for you to come down to actually jump into this competition status. Well, why is that? Well, think of what we just said. A new incumbent, they have no market share, they have limited resources, they have a small ad and R&D budget. Would an incumbent rather compete with that? Or would an incumbent rather have another incumbent that actually has a larger advertising budget, is building R&D, is increasing in market share, and is gaining brand loyalty, right? So an incumbent wants a new entrant to stay in this status. As a new entrant status, small market share, no market share, limited resources. That type of a competitor is not a threat. So most local small mom and pop shops or local small businesses still fit into this realm. They're not a huge threat to a major company. And think about it this way. Kohl's cannot compete with every single local small business boutique that's throughout the country. They just can't. Olive Garden cannot compete with every single Italian restaurant in the country, whether it's a local business, right? They just don't, big companies don't have the resources to deal with all these competitors. What they do is they'll keep you on the radar, but they will try to keep you in this new entrant status. As long as you're not building market share, as long as you're not increasing your ad budget, and more importantly, as long as you're not taking away from their market share, they'll allow you to compete and to actually coexist peacefully. But if you try to actually become a major player and take market share from an incumbent, then they will compete. So as a small business, what are your options? Or as a new entrant into a new category, what are your options? So here's a couple of them. Number one, you can stay small, which is exactly what we're talking about. So the incumbent can't fight anyone. Small market share, not worth the incumbent's time. Most small businesses stay here. If you are happy just coexisting in your local geography, making a very handsome living for your family and for your workers, and you're not looking for rapid expansion, and you're not looking to take market share from an incumbent, then you can actually compete in this space, in that category, without having to worry about the incumbent trying to compete head-to-head with you. So that's option one. The next option, which is another very successful option, is called a buyout option, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to solidify your base segments. And we talked about this in week one with the innovators. And then once you have the innovators solidified, now you're going to start to capture segments in the early adopter stage. Now you want to do this one segment at a time. You want to nibble at the incumbent. You don't want to go head on at the incumbent. That makes a big difference. As long as you're just nibbling and you're just solidifying your own market share and you're just taking little pieces of one segment at a time, you won't be a major threat to them. But then as you start to build momentum, then you actually start, when you start to become a threat to the incumbent, now you want to try to get a buyout package. This is what happened to Instagram when Facebook bought them out. Facebook actually was the dominant social media platform at the time. They saw Instagram just starting with a niche market with just photographers. And then you started seeing more and more individuals start to jump onto Instagram because of the visual storytelling of the social media platform. Facebook saw this, and they saw a younger generation, the millennials, starting to jump onto Instagram, and they wanted to capitalize on this market share moving forward, so they bought them out. Same thing happened with Google and YouTube. Same exact concept. So this is a viable strategy where you want to start off small, you want to expand, but you don't want to compete head-to-head with the incumbent. You're looking to get them to buy you out. You want to prove your concept, you want to prove your brand capability, and then you want to get bought out. All right, so that's the second option. Now, here's a third option. Now, this is the most challenging option. This is the option where you say, you know what, I am going to expand, I am going to grow, I do have something special, and I am going to go head-to-head with the incumbent. All right? In order for this to happen, because keep in mind, your resources are very limited, extremely limited. In order for this to happen, you need to have a strong competitive advantage. That's the only way you can win. And what I mean by a strong competitive advantage, I mean that even though it's a similar product, it is different enough where the consumer finds extreme value in it, more value than what the incumbent has, or there is something you are able to do where you're able to provide the same exact service at a much cheaper rate, where you are able to significantly undercut the incumbent. Those are the two ways that you can actually compete where you have a chance. We have such a strong differentiation, where it's such a unique offering that the consumer will leave the incumbent for you, or you can significantly undercut. Now, the incumbent will unleash when this occurs, so you have to be ready. The incumbent will unleash when this occurs, so you have to be ready. So how are they going to unleash? How are they going to fight? Well, they might drop their prices, and they can absorb a loss. And they may try to undercut you price-wise because they can absorb a loss up front to knock you out. They could increase their advertising budget. They could actually increase their R&D. They could come out with new innovations. They can also go to the suppliers if both of you share suppliers and actually try to either lock up the supplier in an exclusive contract so they can no longer do business with you, or create a deal that's so intriguing for the supplier that they might even raise prices on you going forward. All right? So just be mindful, if you are not going to do one of those two strategies and you're going to go for this strategy, it's perfectly okay. But just remember, you have to plan accordingly because the incumbent will counteract, will actually respond to you. Only 6% of the time is this effective. So can it work? Yes. So you obviously had Walmart overtake Kmart. You had Kohl's overtake Sears. This can happen. You can start off as a small company and gradually build up. But you just have to make sure you do it strategically. All right, guys, so that is the basis for competition. That is sustaining competition. That is competition within one's category. The next video, we're going to talk about what we call a disruptive competitive strategy, or a disruptive innovation, or a disruptive technology. All right, guys, have a good one.